Okay, looks like we're live. So welcome to the Ellensburg City Council study session. This is a training. We are being trained this evening by Ann Bennett, who is the Executive Director of the Washington City's Insurance Authority. And Heidi, if you'd like to make introductions.
I would be happy to. Thank you, Mayor, and welcome council members. And welcome to Ann Bennett, the Executive Director, as the Mayor said, of WCIA, Washington City's Insurance Authority. And I will have to tell you of the 3 cities I've worked for, this is the 3rd city that's been a member of the WCIA risk pool. And I was delighted when I got here to know that Ellensburg was a member as well. And WCIA really has an amazing platform of services that they provide to the city. It's not just, insurance. It's really very proactive training and mitigation programs that they offer. So they are thinking of risk holistically and helping us think every single day of risk holistically. So really appreciate their services. They have some amazing staff and are really trying to always be ahead of the game and think about the interests of the members. So with that, I would welcome Ann Bennett.
Well, thank you, Heidi. I was really glad when you went to another WCIA member city. So I want to thank you for inviting me, and I am very pleased to talk to all of you tonight. I am going to share my screen, which means it's going to be a little difficult for me to see questions. This is intended to kind of be interactive, and I appreciate questions along the way. So what I'll do is pause after each slide. That way, if there's questions, you can get them in during the pause and hopefully I can answer them. I will tell you, I have been accused by other councils of this being a mostly don'ts training, but there's a lot of do's in there. So when you hear the do's, please remember those as well. But mainly my goal is to help you as a council avoid creating liability. I'm also going to just tell you a little bit about WCIA in the very first part of this. So let me share my screen and I'll get the presentation going. So as you heard Heidi introduce me, she introduced us as a risk pool. I've been with WCIA for 26 years and I have a staff of 22 whose whole mission is to help members. We are a municipal entity created by Interlocal. We are a nonprofit, and we were created in 1981 when there was an insurance crisis and insurance carriers wouldn't write public entity risk. We currently have over 165 members and over 193 million in assets. Those assets are mostly tied up in reserves for us to pay claims. So when I mentioned in 1981 there was an insurance crisis, I will let you know that's starting to happen again. We have found carriers pulling out of public entity risk in Washington, saying that it's too generous a state in terms of verdicts, in terms of there's no tort caps. In fact, when I go to national conferences, people always look at me crazy because we don't have tort caps in Washington state where they have limitations of liability. We have very few immunities in Washington state for municipalities. And what's happening is many carriers are choosing not to insure public entities. And even we use a series of insurance carriers behind the scenes. And I'll get into some detail on that in the next slide. But this year we had very few options of who would like to do business in Washington state. The advantages of being in a risk pool, and about 80% of all municipal entities are in risk pools. It's only the very big cities, big counties that self-insure their risks, but most cities are a member of a risk pool. We are run entirely by a board of directors that is constituted by the membership. Every single city, every member has a vote on our board of directors, and your delegate is your city attorney, Terry. We also have an executive committee that's elected from that full board, made up of 9 members, and actually Heidi at our last city sat on our executive board, and they really do the day-to-day operations. Our main mission is to help you avoid risk and reduce losses through risk management. We have all kinds of programs dedicated to helping you manage your risks. We assign a full-time risk management rep to every city. So when you have questions about, should we do this activity, we can help you risk manage it. We have trainings that are offered constantly, and you get credit for these trainings. And this one counts towards one of the 3 required trainings that you have with WCIA. But we train over 13,000 member employees every year. And we also have in-staff claims handling, which can assist with making sure we have a consistency in how our claims are handled. And we can make sure we're creating good case law, not bad case law. It still happens though. And we also have a high retention, which allows us quite a bit of independence in deciding what happens to claims. We have stable rates, and I say that because we don't have wide fluctuations. I can tell you in 1 year, I've had my reinsurance layers behind the scene increase my rates 60, 70, 80%. You get those kinds of swings. Some of you might be seeing that in auto insurance these days. So they can go up and down, and I've never seen an insurance carrier really reduce rates. We actually have years where if things are looking good, we do offer reduced rates. This is not one of those years, I will tell you that. It's very difficult out there right now, and we've had a lot of losses. All the coverage decisions are made by me, so you're not dealing with someone in a corporate office deciding coverage. It's me, and you have a direct appeal right to our executive board if you disagree with my decision, or members do. So I'll pause there and see if there's any questions.
No one's raising their hand.
Okay, so we provide the city all of your liability coverage. It's $20 million per occurrence. So per loss, you have $20 million of coverage. WCIA self-insures the first 4 million. And that's one of the reasons that we are so affected by big loss dollars. A little bit later in this presentation, I'm going to give you an example of a number that came out of Spokane that is staggering. And that's one of the things that's going on, are these things called nuclear verdicts. And the definition of a nuclear verdict is something over $10 million. And those are a regular occurrence these days, which to me, running a risk pool is terrifying, especially with the $4 million retention self-insurance. So that means we retain the first 4 million of each loss. The other thing is, unlike a lot of insurance carriers, I'm looking to help the members. I'm not looking to figure out ways to avoid covering you. I'm looking for ways that I can cover you. There are certain things that aren't covered, and that's all outlined in our coverage documents, but I'm not, trying in any way to deny coverage unless it's very specific to our members. We also provide all kinds of other insurance, property, auto. I will say, Ellensburg, you get my award this year. This year we went from 750,000 in self-insurance in property to $1 million. So we no sooner made that decision, and you guys had a major fire. So you get the award for having the first loss that hit our new $1 million self-insurance layer. So hopefully it doesn't happen too frequently, but that was one call that was a little tough to get, I'll be honest. We purchase cyber and pollution liability coverage for the membership. So that's not something that's included in your price for liability as well. And I'll pause for questions.
No one's leaning in on it.
Okay, well, I'm going to start with some good news. You as an individual receive absolute immunity for your legislative activities. So you, when you are legislating, when you're on the dais and making decisions, you cannot be sued individually. And this has come up where we had a developer who didn't like a zoning decision of one of our members, and they actually filed suit against individual council members. And we went to court and said, you know, they can't do that. They can't sue individuals. And the court agreed. And in fact, this was a little more drawn out than I'm describing it now. But because the developer didn't immediately dismiss the individuals, the court sanctioned them $100,000. And after that was appealed, the Court of Appeals added to that number. So that should give you a relief that when you're legislating, you're in the context of your council meeting, you are immune from liability. I will also let you know that you, as a council member, are insured by WCIA. You are a named insured. So if there is an instance where you do get sued, our coverage would apply to you as a council member. It also applies to volunteers and employees of the city. But again, this is all good news. So this is your real good piece right here. And then we'll get into how you can get yourself into liability trouble. So I'll start with land use. And this is an area where we had quite a bit of liability and decisions against members for a number of years. And we worked very hard to educate the membership on how to avoid liability in land use. And one of the ways, and you do this, is through the use of a hearing examiner. It assists you in eliminating the appearance of, in violating the appearance of fairness doctrine, because you have to sit in a quasi-judicial role. You have to look impartial to a reasonable person who is watching this from the outside. That is often difficult because you have constituents who want to talk to you and voice their opinions. And so oftentimes lawsuits are brought just on that appearance of fairness alone, saying, well, I saw them talking to the opponent, or I saw them having a discussion online that clearly showed they were biased. It also eliminates what's called arbitrary and capricious decision allegations, where you have allegations that say, you know, this decision wasn't found in fact or law, it was completely arbitrary. And that's what brings about a lot of litigation. So by using a hearing examiner, they will have findings of fact and conclusions of law, which are clearly established, and it takes out a lot of the liability that can be a part of land use appeals. However, even with the hearing examiner, you can still get a little bit in trouble. And I have two cases here, one of which was ours, and that's the Westmark versus Burien case. This involved an apartment complex being built in Burien. This is a very old case. It actually started when Burien was incorporated in 1993. These apartments were being developed under King County Code, and the city decided to take over the project during incorporation. One of the big hurdles starting out is that the city of Burien incorporated because they didn't want an apartments in their community. That was the big push for incorporation, is that they wanted to be more of a single family home community than an apartment community. So there was already a lot of opposition to this project. There was a lot of delay, and a lot of it dealt with, it was on a steep slope, and it dealt with environmental issues. But at one point, when we were involved, there was a settlement, and that settlement included a payment of money from us, which was about $200,000, and the city agreeing to certain terms of development and approvals. Well, what occurred is the city in executive session said, yeah, we'll agree to it. We drew up all the paperwork. We filed for dismissal. And then later said, no, we're backing out of the deal. And that resulted in a breach of contract lawsuit. And it was enforced, that was outside of coverage. And basically they said, we're gonna let them have a new lawsuit, start the clock over, and vacate that settlement because the city breached it. So we went into phase 2 of the litigation. Throughout that phase, there were open discussions by council about how are we gonna stop the project? This has to be thwarted. We don't want this project. And in the end, it went to trial, and the plaintiffs got a $10 million verdict, which at that time was unheard of. That was about 2005. It was one of the largest land use verdicts in the state. So what do when you get one of these huge verdicts? Well, you appeal it, which is exactly what we did. And we appealed that decision and lost. And we lost in a big way. It's cited quite a bit in every land use decision out there. And they excoriated the city council and found that they intentionally interfered with this business, that they acted in bad faith. And not only did it uphold the verdict, but it gave some very bad case law out there. So again, when you have a project that is going through the process, please do not insert yourself as a council into that process. The next case, the Mission Springs case, thankfully wasn't ours. And this is what, and I know if I could see Terry, he'd be smiling right now, because I call this the city, listen to your city attorney case. This case came about when a very controversial development was going into the city of Spokane, and several citizens had complained to the mayor. So it had been going through the process. They met all of the development requirements, but the mayor wanted to stop the project. So he invited all of the opponents, not the developer, the opponents, to a council meeting. And on the record, asked for an update as to where they were in the process. The development services director stood up and said, we are issuing grading permits, or the grading permits actually, I'm sorry, had been issued, and that they will be breaking ground. The mayor then said, stop, do not take away, do not issue those permits, take away those permits, stop this development, and you are not to go forward. Well, smartly, the city attorney said, you can't do that. Now, my guess is Terry would have said, excuse me, we need to go into executive session and I need to explain some things to you. For whatever reason, this city attorney did this on the record and said, if you stop this project, if you direct them not to issue these grading permits, you are violating state and federal law, and put that on the record. And what do you think happened? The mayor said, stop, do not issue the permits. So the development directors did not issue the permits. The developer found out, sued immediately. And again, this went up into the court system and they lost along the way. And they found not only was it a violation of state and federal law, but that the individuals who were sued were outside of their legislative immunity. And they found it didn't apply because they intentionally and knowingly broke the law. So that's a big one, that they were found to be outside the course and scope of that immunity. Now, I know this case settled. I know there were all kinds of coverage fights along the way. So I don't know who paid and I don't know how much, but I've heard it was a lot of money in the close to $1 million range, but I don't have that for sure. And I don't know, Terry may know the number. I've never heard the number because there was all kinds of litigation over who was paying. But again, listen to your city attorney. I'm sure Terry will let you know when you need to go into exec session so that you don't get yourself into this type of trouble. And then lastly, I do want to caution a little bit about development agreements. When you are entering into a development agreement, you are doing so under contractual law. So if there is an allegation that is just a straight breach of contract, I mentioned before, that is something that our insurance document doesn't cover. Insurance doesn't cover contracts. So often it's a breach of contract allegation. If something falls apart on the development agreement, and you could find yourself outside of coverage. And so I do want to just put that out there because some members have been surprised by that. So
I'm going to ask a question on this to Terry.
Sure.
I don't recall a development agreement in the last 15 years.
No, we've had
we do.
a couple in the
Okay.
last 15 or 10 years I've been here at least.
Okay,
Yeah.
I was
But
just,
but
for
probably
the
only
newer
about
council
2.
members, if we could just be on the same page about what a development agreement is. You want to explain what?
A development agreement is specifically allowed under the state law for a municipality to enter into an agreement with a developer that sets out the terms and conditions of development. It has to be consistent with state law still, so you can't go outside the boundaries, and consistent with our city ordinances. But it's usually on bigger projects where you want to there may be some trading about what the developer is going to do and what the city will do within the boundaries of the like I say, the ordinances and the state law. But usually it's reserved for bigger projects where there's a lot of ask on one side or the other.
So it's a negotiation instead of this is the code.
It is a negotiation, and it has to be approved in a public hearing by city council and then adopted by resolution.
Thanks.
And I will caveat where I've seen some litigation is when a council has a development agreement and maybe it's years in the making. And, then you have a subsequent council that doesn't like that agreement and wants to change the agreement or violate terms of the agreement. That's where I've seen the litigation. So I will say that's normally where I see problems. Any other questions? All right, I will switch over to a new topic, which is personnel. What I would say is make sure you stay in your legislative role, which is setting policies, setting budgets, adopting code, and you don't want to stray into the executive role, which is management of employees, hiring, firing, discipline. I have seen many personnel cases get very, how shall I say, complicated by council members taking the side of an employee or even just listening to an employee. Sometimes that will be problematic because technically your city manager is the executive is the one that makes those decisions and is responsible for that decision. And what I have found is it's best not to stray into that world. If there is a problem or you've been approached by an employee, you need to let Heidi know so that she can deal with it in her role as an executive. You can always report to her if you see something. I always say, if you see something, say something. And that's very important in the next bullet, which is harassment and discrimination. You are held to the same standards as all city employees. And so you want to make sure that if you see any type of harassment or discrimination occurring, that you report it immediately to your personnel, HR, and or Heidi, so that they can take immediate steps to remedy the problem. You have a harassment policy at the city, and so you want to make sure you know that policy, that you are following that policy, and you know what is acceptable and what isn't. This is an area where you can be sued individually, and you can be sued for harassing employees. So we have online harassment and discrimination training, and I should say it's anti-harassment and discrimination training, not how to. And that training will let you know what's a protected class. There are a variety of protected class statuses for which it is illegal to discriminate against someone for. So, my gender is one, anyone's gender, anyone's race, anyone's national origin. So there are several what I call protected, or what are known as protected classes, it is illegal to discriminate based on those protected classes. So again, I would encourage you to know the policies, to know what is acceptable and what is not. I have had situations where council members harassed city employees. I had a case where a mayor was sexually harassing city employees. And in fact, at many council meetings, there were members of the public that came and held signs that said, stop touching your staff, stop harassing your staff. And in fact, when that mayor went up for re-election, lost, based on the allegations of sexual harassment. So again, this is an area where you want to be 100% above board. And if you see something, say something and report to the executive. If someone comes to you and says, I don't want you to do anything, the answer is, I'm sorry, I have to do something. And I have actually had that happen as a director. I had an employee come to me and said, but I don't want you to do anything. And my answer back was, I'm sorry, I have to do something. I will keep it as confidential as possible. It's not something that you're going to go out and publicize, but I have to do something about it. I have a duty to report it, and I have a duty to make sure that the city is aware of it and can take steps to remedy it. Any questions here? All right, the next one is a little complicated. It's something called negligent misrepresentation. And what this has to deal with is if you make a specific promise or assurance to someone, and that person relies on that promise or assurance and then acts on it, but then suffers damages, that is something called negligent misrepresentation. So I'll give you an example. One of our members has a downtown that is all cedar shingle clad buildings. And a business owner just didn't have the money to redo the side of his business with cedar shingle and decided to go into City Hall and see if he could do something differently. The problem was the planning director was actually out and they didn't have a very big department. So no one was there to answer the question. So the business owner asked if they could talk to the mayor. Mayor came out and he said, look, I can't afford this. Can I just do stucco instead of putting up this cedar shingle? And the mayor said, wow, we really value your business. Yeah, just go ahead. I understand you don't have the money, and we want to keep you happy as a happy and successful business here. So this business owner went ahead, tore down his cedar, started putting up his stucco siding, and immediately got a stop work order saying you're in violation of our code. And he was stunned and said, wait a minute, I was told by the mayor I could do this. That was a negligent misrepresentation. And we actually paid for him to take down his stucco that he put up and all of his costs because he was damaged as a result of that specific promise or assurance. So what I would say to you is, if you're asked a question, make sure that you refer those specific questions to staff. That's what they're there for. You have subject matter experts available. So what I always say is, I don't know the answer, but I can get you to the person who does, and let the staff person know that you're referring someone to them to answer a question they have. And what I would say is, if you want to make sure, hey, did you follow up with that citizen? Yes, I did. Here was the answer. That's fine. But again, you just don't want to take matters into your own hands, because when you do that, you could be getting into promises and assurances that can't or are incorrect, or are something that the person could say, I relied on it and I acted on it and it was wrong advice. So again, I would encourage you to refer whatever questions you have or a specific situation to your staff. They are the experts. I don't see any raised hands or questions.
Nothing.
Okay, well, defamation, I'm going to scare you here. So defamation is something I have to laugh, because every time I do this, there's somebody that will say to me, but Ann, there's a case that says, we can defame people. And what it deals with is elections. So it's amazing to me that we have a US Supreme Court case that basically says you can defame your opponent in an election and that's okay. So, that to me was kind of, wow, all right. But, what I will say is you are here to debate. And so if your opinion and your statement is regarding a legislative concern, you have immunity. You have quite a bit of immunity for your debates on legislative concerns. Where you can get into trouble is discussing or naming individuals. There is some liability here. It really hinges on some very specific fact patterns. You know, if they're a public official, there's some leeway, but if they're staff or a private individual, that can be concerning. And any untruth can give rise to liability. So in the end of January, Spokane County had a defamation verdict awarded against it by a former employee who claimed he was defamed by the sheriff during a press conference. And that jury awarded $18 million. 18 million. That's a gut punch. Those type of numbers I've never seen come out of Eastern Washington. And this case, he got the 18 million. He'll also have an attorney fee shift likely. And so it will be even more money. There was a Spokesman Review article about who's going to pay for it. And the county basically said, well, you know, the county risk pool has 20 million, but after all the attorney's fees and everything else, we'll probably be on the hook for some of that verdict. So what I will say is that case is out there. People know about it and they know about the numbers involved. I believe the county is appealing that case. I haven't heard officially. But what I would say is if anything is involving an individual, please stay away from it. It is an area ripe for litigation, and I'm guessing we will see a lot more defamation cases after seeing that last verdict. Any questions on this one? All right, my next topic is one of public works, and I call this be careful to not just don't what I call politically engineer. And what do I mean by that? I mean putting in stop signs, crosswalks, deciding speed limits without engineering guidance. Often what will happen is you'll feel a lot of pressure from citizens who say we want a crosswalk, a sign, or a lower speed limit. And what you need to do is make sure that you are talking to staff and that they are studying the issue. What happens in road design cases is that the plaintiff will often bring suit against the at-fault party, but they'll also bring suit against the city or the county or the state. And that's under a theory called joint and several liability. So what occurs with joint and several liability, and I'll preface this by saying if you sit on a jury, you never get to hear about this. But what occurs is that if a plaintiff is fault-free, so if I'm a pedestrian in a crosswalk, I'm just walking in a crosswalk legally, and I am hit by a car, and the car doesn't have enough insurance, I'm often going to bring a road design lawsuit that says this crosswalk was poorly placed or wasn't lit. And because I'm fault-free, I can collect against any party. So it could be the person who hit me or the city who designed the crosswalk. So what we in the industry call this is deep pockets liability. So when a jury hears a road design case, they don't know that even if they find the city 1% at fault, the city will be 100% responsible for the dollar award if the plaintiff is fault-free. So we have had some road design cases. We had one where the jury found absolutely nothing wrong with the crosswalk, but said you could have done more and awarded $6 million. That's up on appeal right now. And so far we've had some good decisions with regard to that case. But again, what often will happen is that plaintiffs will look in the record for some type of statements about a dangerous crosswalk on the record, or complaints of, this area is a death trap. So what I would say is avoid inflammatory statements when addressing these concerns. What these road design cases are engineering malpractice cases. And so you're going to have engineering on both sides explaining why this decision was made. So the last thing you want is the stop sign that was put in because a citizen requested it and it didn't meet any engineering standards, and in fact created more of a traffic hazard than it solved. And that can happen because you need proper flow of traffic, and you can have people backed up, and you can have conflict with pedestrians and vehicles. So again, you want to make sure that you're referring these to staff, that engineers are looking at these issues and are coming up with solutions. I will tell you that, crosswalk litigation is one that surprises a lot of people, because honestly, they're not force fields, and more people are killed in crosswalks than they are jaywalking. And that's because people feel safe in them. And when they're jaywalking, they're looking in all directions. So, it's the last thing you want to do is put a crosswalk in where it doesn't belong, because that can be very problematic. Any questions on this one? I will ask you to not leak executive session information. I always call this resist the temptation to share. If you have conflicts, please recuse yourself from that executive session. And you can jeopardize your defense in claims and litigation if you're leaking outside exec session. I've seen this in several of my cases. I went to a mediation one time, and I learned that the other side knew my maximum amount because it was disclosed during an executive session with counsel. So as I thought I was negotiating, I realized that they knew my top dollar, and they were just sitting and demanding that top dollar. So much like, buying a house, you don't want to buy a house when your top budget number is already known to the other side, and that they're just going to wait until you pay the maximum amount. There's a reason you have this executive session, and it's to discuss things that if it were an open session would be unfair to the city and could jeopardize the city. So again, I've had situations where we have had discussions with our attorneys in executive session, and what our advice was told to other interested parties. And in fact, those council members were sanctioned for releasing that information outside of executive session. It never helps to have executive session information leaked or told. And like I said, the reason it's there is because it would lead to a bias against the city if it were known. Any questions?
No questions.
Okay, so lastly, I would say, and I'm going to give you a little bit of your evening back. I would say be mindful of written communications. You want to make sure you're always using your city email address, not your personal address. Be very careful about violating OPMA. If you are saying, what do you think, kind of this serial emailing, what's your vote going to be, what's your vote going to be, that's a big no-no. Remember that your emails are subject to public disclosure and that they can be discoverable in litigation. So I'm always very careful what I put in email, because when people read it, it can be taken in different ways. And so you want to make sure that your emails are professional and to the point and very businesslike. One last area to remind you of is your social media account. If you have a social media account, the question is it a personal account for you? Is it an election activity account? And these are big differences. Or is it to discuss city business? If you have an account dedicated to allowing for information for your constituents as part of city business, you need to be careful about allowing comments and discussions. And I say that, pushing out information is fine, but we had a mayor who had opened up his Facebook for discussions back and forth. And what occurred is a hate group started posting on his social media account, and he blocked them. And the problem is he had created what's called an open public forum. So your council meetings are an open public forum, and people, there's discourse involved, and you cannot shut down people's right to speak, or you can be violating the First Amendment. And that's what happened to this mayor. Even though it was hate speech, and even though it was inappropriate, by creating that forum, he had no rules with regard to public speech on his Facebook page, and in fact had gotten into a First Amendment violation. So if you want more on this, I know there's a really good article on MRSC about this, but we ended up having to pay for a First Amendment violation because of this open public forum. So I put that out there as a caution to you. And again, that is the end of my formal presentation, but I'm really happy to answer any questions you may have about WCIA, about liability, about what we're seeing out there.
Are there any questions? We have none for you tonight. Thank you for the presentation.
You're very welcome, and I hope you found this instructive and helpful, and I wish you all the best, and I want to thank you for being a member of WCIA.
More like scary, just, but helpful. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ann.
So we will turn from our study session and be back here at 7 o'clock for our council meeting.